After 10 years of being together with Victoria, we were finally getting married. However, the day before our wedding, she received an unexpected phone call from Ethan, her first love. "Victoria, I'm here to stop this wedding," he said. "You'll come with me, won't you?" Victoria's voice trembled as she responded, her eyes reddening. "How dare you? How dare you show up in my life again? I don't want to see you." Despite her words, she spent the entire night crying on the balcony. She even wore the necklace Ethan had given her to the wedding ceremony. I couldn't help but smile wryly at this sight. I immediately called Ethan. $3 million, I said. "Don't come back tomorrow." "Sincere," he replied righteously. "You can't think money solves everything." I cut him off. $2 million, he stammered. "True love is priceless. Victoria and I share something real." I raised my voice slightly. $3 million. Take it or I'm hanging up." "Wait, don't hang up." The wedding proceeded smoothly. After most guests had left, including our immediate family members, only our closest friends remained. They insisted on celebrating until everyone was properly drunk. Victoria, her cheeks flushed from alcohol, seemed to be in good spirits, at least on the surface. She took a sip from every toast offered to us. Perhaps she drank too quickly, for she started coughing, leaning against me. Her eyes turned red from coughing, giving her a delicate, vulnerable appearance. Yet there was a hint of a smile playing at her lips, caught between joy and sorrow. The guests exchanged uncertain glances. "Is everything all right with your wife, Sincere?" someone asked. I waved off their concern, pulling Victoria closer. "She's just overwhelmed with happiness. It's our wedding day, after all." She's emotional. But anyone paying attention could see that Victoria wasn't quite herself today. She had been distracted several times, especially during the ring exchange. When I slipped the ring onto her finger, she glanced at the tightly closed main doors, her expression caught between a sigh and a sneer. She let out a small laugh before turning back, all emotions carefully masked. No one knew what was troubling her, except me, and all I could do was apologize silently, knowing she wouldn't get what she was waiting for today. At the dinner table, someone called out, "Hey, you two haven't done the traditional wedding cup ceremony yet? Come on, you can't skip this." I released my arm from around Victoria and stepped forward with a slight smile, ignoring her lingering gaze. Taking up a glass of wine, I announced, "Let's skip the ceremonial cup. You all enjoy yourselves, the venue is yours for the rest of the night, and everything's on my tab. I need to head out." With that, I drained my glass in one go. By now, if anyone couldn't sense something was wrong, they'd have to be truly obtuse. An awkward silence fell over the room, but I maintained my smile as I set down my glass and turned to leave. Victoria caught up with me in the lobby. She had run after me, clutching my sleeve tightly. "Where are you going?" she demanded breathlessly. I responded expressionlessly, "The airport." "The airport? Why? Where are you flying to?" Checking my watch, I replied, "France, fashion exhibition." Victoria's brows furrowed in frustration. "What do you mean, Sincere? What are you doing? We just got married and you're leaving without a word?" I looked at her, taking in the elegant mermaid dress she wore. I let out an almost inaudible sigh. The dress was entirely handmade. I had personally overseen its creation, flying abroad 4 times to perfect every detail. Without question, it was the perfect wedding dress. Yet somehow on Victoria today it didn't look right. What a waste. I reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Then my hand traced down her cheek to her neck, where, as she swallowed nervously, I pulled out the necklace hidden beneath her dress. Victoria's face turned ashen. She instinctively tried to back away, but my grip held her in place. She opened and closed her mouth several times, unable to form words. So I broke the silence. "Don't worry. He didn't cancel. I just bought his time for $3 million. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., you can pick him up at the airport." We both knew who he was. The necklace, the one Victoria had thrown into the swimming pool 10 years ago. I had witnessed Ethan buying it myself. Every detail of the past was crystal clear in my mind. Apparently, she wasn't the only one who couldn't let go. Leaving the hotel, I felt the evening breeze and pulled my collar closer. Suddenly, a red sports car sped toward me. I stepped back instinctively, but it stopped right in front of me. The window rolled down to reveal Sophie, red lips curved in a slight smile. "Need a ride, handsome?" she asked casually. I was speechless. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" She pouted indifferently. "Are you getting in or not?" I shook my head, declining politely. "I'm waiting for my driver," she snorted. "That mustard yellow Cullinan?" Got a flat tire. Before I could respond, Victoria came running out. Her expression was pained as she said, "Sincere, let's talk. It's not what you think." This necklace. A car horn interrupted Victoria's monologue. She asked the same question I had. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" Sophie's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Why do you care where I am? Come on, Sincere, get in." Victoria's face flushed red as she grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back. I didn't move. When I finally turned to look at her, our eyes met, and I slowly peeled her fingers away from my arm one by one. Victoria's face turned ashen, tears welling up in her eyes. But she remained silent, just watching me. My heart ached for a moment, but I still opened Sophie's car door and got in. Sophie let out a triumphant hum. As the window rolled up, she stepped on the gas. The acceleration was so powerful it made my heart skip a beat. I had almost forgotten how reckless she could be. "Miss Sophie," I said wearily, "could you value your life a bit more?" I realized too late that my tone was harsh, but to my surprise, Sophie just responded with a soft "mm-hmm" and actually slowed down. "Thank you," I said. Licking my dry lips, I felt awkward and suddenly regretted my impulsive decision to get in her car. Sophie seemed to sense this and turned on the stereo, playing soft background music. She tilted her chin toward the compartment and said, "There's water if you need it." I nodded. "Thanks." I should have made small talk, but I wasn't in the mood. Instead, I leaned against the window in resigned silence, watching the city lights blur past. My thoughts were a mess, remembering 10 years ago, the years between, and today. I couldn't make sense of any of it. Despite my outwardly composed demeanor, I was hurting. Beyond the pain was exhaustion, bone-deep weariness seeping from my core. I took out my phone and sent Victoria a message. "My suggestion is to keep your affair with Ethan private for now. We'll dissolve our marriage gradually. We can discuss the details when I return. Of course, if you prefer a clean break, you'll have to bear the consequences yourself." After sending the message, I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, we had arrived at the airport. It felt like I had only blinked, but 40 minutes had passed. My heart skipped a beat as I hurriedly got out of the car, only to find Sophie standing outside sipping bubble tea. "Awake now?" she asked. "I was going to wake you after finishing my drink." Embarrassed, I said, "Thanks for today. I'll treat you to dinner when I get back." As I turned to leave, she caught my arm. "Wait, we're going together." I looked at her in confusion. She explained, "I'm on the same flight to France. You're also going to the fashion exhibition?" I asked, my rusty brain slowly turning. I answered my own question. "Right, you should be on the invitation list." I had resolved the question in my mind, failing to notice Sophie's quiet sigh of relief. The schedule in France was intense, almost non-stop. For 3 days, Sophie and I went everywhere together. At first, it was out of courtesy. She had helped me, after all, and I couldn't just treat her as a mere acquaintance anymore. But as we spent more time together, I discovered that Sophie wasn't the spoiled, sharp-tongued person rumors painted her to be. On the contrary, she was quite considerate most of the time, and we shared many similar views. I couldn't help joking. "I really hope we can have more collaborations with Miss Sophie in the future." Sophie's lips curved into a smile. "We will." We took the same flight back home, too. Landing at AM, she again offered me a ride. This time, I didn't refuse. However, at the arrival hall, we saw Victoria. She stood there in a black dress, seemingly lost in thought. When she saw me, her eyebrows lifted slightly in a gentle expression. But when she noticed Sophie behind me, her brows immediately furrowed. "Sophie," she bit out, "what are you trying to do?" Sophie responded coolly, "What do you think I'm trying to do?" Victoria raised her voice. "Sophie, I'm warning you. Stay away from Sincere." Sophie shot back, "I'm sorry, but in what capacity are you warning me?" Victoria declared, "I'm Sincere's wife." Sophie smiled faintly. "Are you? If I remember correctly, you two haven't legally registered your marriage yet." Sophie was right. Although Victoria and I had held the wedding ceremony, we hadn't officially registered our marriage. We had planned to do it a month later. Initially, I thought it was too late, but now I could only feel relieved. Sophie's words clearly hit a nerve. Victoria raised her hand to slap her, but I quickly stepped between them. Rubbing my temples, I said, "Enough. Stop this." Victoria stared at me coldly, her eyes blazing with anger. "You're protecting her?" I was getting a headache, a real one. I didn't want to argue or fight. I just wanted to sleep. "We can talk about this later, okay?" Victoria clenched her jaw. I could clearly see the humiliation in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she said, "Let's go home." I let out a derisive laugh. "Go where? You want me to go watch you and Ethan be lovey-dovey?" "Sorry, I don't have that particular interest." Ethan had returned to the country the day after I left, right on schedule. A friend told me about it. Victoria had been very discreet about picking him up. Hardly anyone knew. The two of them had slipped away immediately after landing, fully disguised with masks, sunglasses, and hats, like celebrities avoiding paparazzi. The afternoon I received this news, I stumbled on some steps. I wasn't seriously injured, but it hurt. My head was pounding. Sophie wiped the dust off my shoes and asked what was wrong. I just shook my head, saying nothing. I couldn't help but think that at least Victoria had taken my advice about being discreet. Even now, with her coming to pick me up, she was doing the right thing. After all, we'd just had our wedding ceremony and received substantial gifts and business deals. Even if it was all for show, she needed to put in some effort. But I was too tired. Massaging my temples, I said, "I just want to go home and sleep. We can talk about everything tomorrow." When I got home, I practically passed out. By the time I woke up, the sun was setting. The empty, dark room seemed to amplify all my negative emotions. I lay there, eyes open, letting the bleakness wash over me until I felt numb inside. I got up and splashed some water on my face. Victoria was sitting in the living room. I wasn't surprised to see her. She knew not just my house code, but even my bank PIN. I poured myself a glass of ice water and drank it in one go. She asked softly, "When did you find out?" It was a stupid question. I replied, "Since you only got his call the night before the wedding, when do you think I could have found out?" "Sorry, but I listened to your phone recording. It was the day before the wedding. According to tradition, we shouldn't have seen each other. But during our afternoon phone call, I heard something off in her voice. I asked, 'Is your leg hurting again?' She replied, 'It's fine, don't worry about it.' I knew Victoria too well. When she said things like that, the pain was usually severe. Without hesitation, I drove to her house. When I arrived, she was still busy, scrolling through her laptop screen with one hand while massaging her calf with the other. Seeing me, she asked in surprise, "Why did you come?" I held up the thermos and medicine I'd brought. "Delivery service," I said. She said softly, "I'm not that delicate. Some self-massage will do." Despite her words, I could see the joy in her eyes. I gave her the medicine, poured her some soup, helped her lie down, and gently massaged the pressure points on her calf. The atmosphere was perfect. Without looking up, I knew she was watching me. It was peaceful, tranquil. I liked it. Then her phone rang. I handed it to her. An unmarked international number, a number I shouldn't have remembered but was etched in my mind. It was the same number Victoria had repeatedly called, begging into the phone, when she was in agony years ago. Ethan's number. I didn't show any reaction, and neither did Victoria. She said it was a friend with urgent business and asked me to step out. But she locked the bedroom door. When she came out, apart from her slightly hoarse voice, everything seemed normal. She said, "I'm feeling better now. You should go home." I nodded without arguing, but borrowed her phone under the pretense of work. She probably didn't even know her phone's recording function was on. And so I overheard that brief conversation. A male voice said, "Victoria, if I come to stop the wedding, you'll come with me, won't you?" Victoria choked back tears, saying, "How dare you torture me by showing up again? I don't want to see you." That night she cried on the balcony all night long. We were both waiting for an outcome. Until she put on that necklace before walking down the aisle, I understood. I had my answer. Victoria asked, "Since you knew everything, why didn't you do anything?" I laughed coldly. "What should I have done? Called off the wedding?" "Victoria, I should be the one asking you. How dare you? You were planning to run away from our wedding. Do you understand what that ceremony meant? If it hadn't proceeded as planned, the penalty clauses alone would have been astronomical. Have you calculated the market impact, the stock fluctuations?" She pressed her lips together. "Is that all?" I replied, "What else?" Victoria clenched her fists, took a deep breath, and said, "If I told you I wouldn't have gone with him, would you believe me?" I shook my head. Adults don't deal in what-ifs. Since you're here, let's discuss what happens next. I suggest we handle this gradually. Our joint investments and shared properties can continue as they are. Of course, if you want out, I'll take over everything. However, the amount is substantial, so it would have to be paid in installments. If you can't wait," she interrupted me. "Sincere." "What?" "I need time," she said. I was slow to comprehend. "What do you mean?" Victoria looked at me. her gaze steady but tinged with sadness. "I can't forget," she said. "Ethan, everything from back then. I can't forget." It felt like someone had stabbed me in the chest. The knife had barbs, and pulling it out took chunks of my flesh with it. She said she couldn't forget. Though I had already known this answer in my heart, hearing it from her own lips was devastating. Love is a strange thing. Those times from the past. The past. In the past, Ethan had been my best friend. In the past, Victoria had hated Ethan. She had said, "Selfish, greedy, calculating. How can you be friends with someone like Ethan?" But later, she fell for him. She said, "I've never met anyone who lives so genuinely and freely." It took just 3 years for them to go from mutual antagonism to kindred spirits. Their actual relationship lasted only 6 months. A secret teenage romance. Only I knew. I helped cover for them, along with concealing my own feelings for Victoria. I thought that was it. But then everything changed too quickly. Victoria's car accident. Her leg was permanently injured. Ethan took the $500,000 from Victoria's family and left the country. It almost destroyed Victoria. She became self-destructive, withdrawn, refusing anyone's approach, except mine. People asked me if it was worth it. They said she was clearly using me as a substitute for Ethan. Why torture myself? But that wasn't it. I wasn't torturing myself, and I never thought about whether it was worth it. This was Victoria. The Victoria I'd grown up with. The one I'd called little sister for years, who would cry if I didn't spend time with her. The same Victoria who would fight anyone who spoke ill of me in school. Loving her was my own choice. She hadn't hurt me. When she was in trouble, I had to help. Eventually, we naturally grew closer, and I had to admit, I had my own selfish reasons. I still loved her. I couldn't let go. I wanted to try. I thought I had succeeded. From age 18 to 28, surely 10 years of memories could cover their 3 years. I snapped, "Give you time? What kind of time? Time to choose between the two of us?" Victoria, don't turn yourself into a joke. This was probably the first time I'd ever spoken to Victoria in such a harsh tone. She seemed hurt by it, biting her lip and turning away quickly. She left in a hurry, limping noticeably, a remnant of her old injury. Everyone said Victoria always walked with grace and elegance, like a proper lady, but in reality, it was all to mask her disability. Over the years, no matter how good the therapy or treatment, she never fully recovered. She could only walk slowly, step by step, and I had always been by her side. This time, I turned away and didn't look back. While our situation could be hidden from outsiders, it couldn't be kept from our families. When my parents found out, they were furious, threatening to settle scores with Victoria's family. Before I could calm them down, news came that Victoria's mother had been hospitalized. Suddenly, no one knew quite how to direct their anger. My father sighed. "I don't understand your thinking. By all rights, having your wife stolen is an unforgivable offense. You've been deeply wronged and we should make the Liu family pay. Yet you're acting like nothing happened. Tell me, what's really on your mind?" I replied, "Let's leave it. There's no point in becoming enemies. We still have business to conduct. We can't cut all ties. Of course, we'll still make money where we can." My father sighed again. "You've really grown up." That sigh made my heart ache. An assistant knocked and entered, announcing Sophie's arrival. My father asked what was going on. I explained she had a project she wanted to collaborate on. Sophie's project was practically guaranteed to be profitable. Many people wanted to work with the U Corporation, yet she had specifically chosen me. "Why?" I asked her. She snorted. "Because I like the look of you." I laughed. "That's quite impulsive." She nodded seriously. "Yes, that's exactly how impulsive I am. When business comes knocking, there's no reason to turn it away." That evening, we attended a business dinner together. Victoria's unexpected appearance caught me off guard. She walked to my side and took away my wine glass, half leaning on my chair. She apologized to everyone at the table. "I'm sorry to intrude. I shouldn't be at this kind of gathering, but my husband hasn't been feeling well lately and shouldn't drink too much. I was worried, so I wanted to keep an eye on him. Is that all right?" Even as she spoke, she had already pulled up a chair beside me and sat down, making a show of putting food in my bowl. Sophie's face darkened, looking ready to explode. I subtly shook my head at her. If Victoria wanted to play the role of loving wife, I couldn't expose her in public. I had to play along. By the time dinner ended in the early hours, most guests had left in various states of intoxication. Only Sophie, Victoria, and I remained. Victoria threw her elegant chopsticks onto the ground. the mask of sweet affection gone from her face, replaced by indignation. "Sophie," she declared, "I don't care what you're planning, but stay away from Sincere." Grabbing my sleeve, Victoria said, "Husband, let's go home." Sophie, not to be outdone, grabbed my other arm. Victoria shouted, "Sophie, let go! Don't think I won't slap you!" Sophie laughed coldly, retorting, "Little cripple, I've been tolerating you all evening too." Victoria's face flushed red. Seeing they were about to fight, I pushed them both away, saying, "Do what you want. I'm leaving." Victoria gave Sophie a cold look before chasing after me. Once again she said, "Let's go home." I stepped back. "Victoria, could you stop bothering me? You've clearly made your choice, it's Ethan. So stick to your choice. Stop coming to bother me. I'm tired of it." In the dim light, I couldn't quite make out Victoria's expression, but I heard her trembling voice. "I just don't want you to be fooled by a bad woman. Sophie has ulterior motives. Don't trust her." I laughed bitterly. "Deceived? Ulterior motives? For all these years, weren't you the one deceiving me?" She started. "I didn't." I cut her off, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Don't rush to deny it. 6 months ago, the day after we set our wedding date, you went abroad. You stood outside Ethan's residence all night. I followed you and stood there all night too. When you came back, you were sick for a week. I took care of you as usual, never asking, never saying anything. I thought, let that be your final farewell to the past. 2 years ago, on Ethan's birthday, you went back to our high school neighborhood, at that noodle shop where we used to eat together. The owner still remembered you. She asked if you were married, if it was to that tall, thin boy. You said yes. I was right outside the door. You were beaming while I was devastated. 3 years ago, I found that necklace in the only safe I didn't know the combination to. The code wasn't Ethan's birthday. It was the day you two got together. That cheap necklace from a street vendor, just a few dollars. You threw it into the swimming pool in front of me. You must have retrieved it yourself. I remember you got terribly sick around that time. High fever, severe cold, lost a lot of weight. I didn't want to mention all this, saying it makes me sound pathetic. I've always despised people who chase hopelessly after someone, yet with you I lost all my principles. 10 years of sunk cost. How could I let go easily? But I finally understood, no matter how high the sunk cost. Today is always the day with the smallest loss. So Miss Lou, please stop bothering me. I'm very busy." Saying all this left me physically and emotionally drained. Victoria stood frozen in place, no longer following me. I walked slowly forward, not knowing for how long, until I was too tired and crouched down by the roadside. After a while, Sophie's red sports car slowly approached, stopping beside me. The window rolled down, and she looked at me with a pretentiously haughty expression, asking, "Mr. G, quite ruthless, aren't you?" Leaving me behind and walking off. "Why'd you stop walking?" I sighed. "Sophie, I can't walk anymore." "Sophie," I asked, "why did you call her a cripple?" "Because that's what she is," she replied, then added after a pause, "If you don't like it, I won't say it anymore." I shook my head. "I don't care, I just want to warn you, she may look delicate, but her slaps really hurt." She snorted. "She can't beat me." "Really?" I nodded and said, "Sophie, let me treat you to some lamb soup. I know a really good place." "Sophie, play some music, would you?" I hesitated for a moment before asking, "Sophie, would you mind if I cry for a bit?" The situation with Victoria's family had become quite awkward. Her mother was in the hospital, and my mother hoped I would visit. She said, "Mrs. Lou has called me multiple times, crying and apologizing to you. Whatever Victoria did, mister. And Mrs. Lou's care for you over the years wasn't fake." I nodded and agreed to go. Walking toward the hospital room with a fruit basket, I froze as I turned into Ward C. Outside the room in the hallway, a man sat cross-legged on the floor. He wore all black, looking haggard and extremely thin, holding a lighter in one hand and a cigarette in the other, arguing with a nurse. "Sir, you can't smoke in the hospital," the nurse was saying. "I won't go inside. I'll just smoke here," the man replied. "That's not allowed either." "Then what am I supposed to do? I'll die without a smoke." "If you must smoke, you can go outside." The man shook his head. "Then tell those guys across from me to let me leave." The nurse was at a loss. He continued, "Then just let me smoke." "No." In one swift motion, I snatched the lighter from his hand. The man's head snapped up, our eyes met, and then he quickly looked down so fast I worried he'd hurt his neck. I handed the lighter to the nurse. It's fine, you can go. The nurse sighed in relief, thanking me repeatedly. I nodded and started to walk inside, having no intention of interacting with the man on the floor. But he suddenly stood up and grabbed my shoulder. "Brother Sincere," he said. I knocked his hand away and said in a low voice, "Don't call me brother." He stammered, "Brother." I gritted my teeth. "Ethan, I told you, I'm not your brother." Ethan fell silent, then quietly sat back down. I sighed and said, "Didn't I give you $3 million? Why are you still smoking such cheap cigarettes?" Ethan gave a small laugh. "I returned the $3 million to you, remember? Why did you return it?" He furrowed his brow. "Asking for money was just me messing with you. I can't believe you took it seriously." I was speechless. Then Ethan stood up again and came closer. "Sincere, the Hyatt Hotel. My daughter and I are staying there. She's so well behaved and obedient. I can't leave here, but could you check on her?" Ethan told me he had a 6-year-old daughter who had returned to China to start first grade. When I asked about the mother, he said she left after giving birth, probably thought I couldn't provide for her. I don't mind. We didn't have any real feelings anyway, just living together. I raised the kid by myself. Pretty impressive, right? My head was spinning. "Ethan, if you're sick, go get treatment. You don't need to tell me all these details." This unexpected news left me unable to stay any longer. I turned and left the hospital, driving straight to the hotel. Outside the room, I knocked on the door. A childish voice asked, "Who is it?" I froze for a moment, not knowing how to introduce myself, and blurted out, "Sincere." As soon as I said it, I felt foolish. But the door opened, revealing a little girl with curly hair looking at me curiously. After a long moment, her eyes lit up and she exclaimed, "Uncle!" It was surreal. Ethan, who had been abroad for 10 years, had a 6-year-old daughter. He had disrupted my marriage, yet left his 6-year-old daughter alone in a hotel. He had even told his daughter that I was his best friend, and that if anything happened to him, she should come find me. What kind of person does such outrageous things? I had the little girl moved to a room on the top floor and arranged for a nanny to take care of her. She was well behaved throughout, never making a fuss. After settling her in, I was about to go confront Ethan when Victoria's call came in. "Where are you?" she asked. "I need to talk to you." "Perfect timing," I replied. "I'm on my way to your place. Have Ethan join us." I arrived quickly. Victoria opened the door, and in the living room, Ethan sat on the carpet smoking, waving cheerfully when he saw me. "What did you want to tell me?" I asked Victoria. She looked troubled, furrowing her brow slightly. "Not everyone's here yet. Let's wait until everyone arrives." I couldn't imagine who else could be involved with the three of us. No matter how hard I racked my brain, I never expected the last person to arrive would be Sophie. Victoria snorted. "You actually dared to come." Sophie's expression was indifferent. She didn't even glance at Victoria, walking straight to me instead. She pressed her lips together and said, "I'm sorry, Sincere. I didn't want to hide things from you. If you're angry with me, I won't blame you. I just hope you'll give me a chance to explain myself." I asked, puzzled, "This involves you?" She nodded. "Yes." I looked at Victoria, then at Ethan. "Wait a moment," I said. "Let me deal with this first." I turned to Victoria. "Did you know Ethan has a 6-year-old daughter?" She replied, "I knew." "Then what were you thinking? Getting together with Ethan while abandoning his daughter on the side?" Victoria kept shaking her head. "Sincere, that's not what I wanted to talk about." "But that's what I want to talk about," I said. "And you, Ethan, I've had someone look after the child for now. Whatever you two are planning, leaving a child alone in a hotel is despicable." I stopped in my tracks and turned around. Sophie was looking at me nervously. I said, "So what?" Victoria asked, confused. "What do you mean?" I turned back to look at her. "What was your purpose in telling me this?" She replied, "I just wanted you to know that Sophie has ulterior motives. This was all her scheme. Don't let her fool you." "And then?" Victoria looked indignant. "And then? What do you mean, and then? Sincere, don't you understand? If it weren't for Sophie, none of this would have happened. Can't you see that?" I laughed. "No, it's you who doesn't understand, Victoria. Ethan's return was just the final straw. In fact, I should thank Sophie for opening my eyes. Otherwise, this could have gone on indefinitely." Sophie and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I asked, "Sophie, is it what I think it is, or have I misunderstood?" It was the first time I'd seen her shy and hesitant. To be honest, it was quite interesting. I wasn't stupid. From meeting Sophie at the wedding to everything that happened afterward, I had noticed the oddities. I just hadn't thought about it that way. Sophie raised her eyes to look at me, serious and focused, as if having made up her mind. She said, "Yes, you're right. I like you." Her directness left me speechless. I couldn't help asking, "Why?" She rested her chin on her hand, thinking for a moment. "It's a long story. You probably don't remember." She explained that she had attended high school in another city. The summer after her college entrance exam, her grandmother passed away. She returned home for the funeral, devastated because everyone had kept it from her due to the exams. She had missed her grandmother's funeral. She was angry then, fighting with her family. That day, in the rain, she ran away from home only to encounter some thugs. They cornered her in an alley, and she couldn't escape. She slipped and fell, getting hurt and bleeding. When all seemed hopeless, she saw me. She said I had my bodyguard take the leader to the police station. Then, inexplicably, I took her picture and gave her an umbrella. I told her I'd have the photo developed and bring it to her the next day. But I never came. The distant memory awakened with Sophie's narration. I remembered that rainy day. It was raining while the sun was still shining. I was taking photos in that cobblestone alley when I happened upon a girl being surrounded. After I dealt with the situation, I saw her sitting on the steps. The sunlight mixed with rain fell on her, as if she were under a spotlight. So I raised my camera and said, "Little angel, make a peace sign." Coming back to the present, I said, "It was you." She said, "Yes." This coincidence made me smile, but then I felt apologetic about breaking my promise. I said I didn't mean to stand you up. That night, Victoria had her accident. She replied, "I know." I started to say something, but Sophie smiled and said, "I know what you want to ask. No, I haven't been in love with you for 10 years. Before, I was just grateful, always wanting to repay you somehow. I fell for you because of our recent time together. Sincere, falling in love with you isn't difficult." I said, "What about the Ethan situation?" The usually straightforward Sophie suddenly fell silent. I smiled. "It's okay. I'm not angry," she said. "It's not that I'm afraid you'll be angry." I understood the implication. I sat up straighter and said, "Go ahead. I can handle it." Sophie hesitated for a long time. I didn't rush her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she said, "About 2 weeks ago, I ran into Victoria at a bar. She had drunk a lot. She said if it weren't for Ethan, she would never have been with you." A casual remark had caught Sophie's attention, so she approached Ethan with $2 million and a primary school admission spot. She wanted to know the reason. "Ethan didn't tell me why," Sophie explained. "But 2 days before your wedding, he said he needed to correct a mistake." "What mistake?" "Only Ethan knows." I called Ethan, who was out of breath when he answered. "I'll tell you everything," he said. "But you need to pick me up first. I just had a fight with Victoria, and I'm trying to leave. Damn, can't even get a taxi in this place." Ethan had already eaten over 20 skewers at the street food stall and showed no signs of stopping. 10 years ago, I had rushed to the airport, telling him to return to Victoria's side, warning him that if he left then, he should never come back. 10 years later, we sat peacefully eating street food together. Time is a peculiar thing. After another half bowl of fried noodles, Ethan finally slowed down. He spoke slowly. "Before Emma, I hadn't planned to return to China. After having Emma, I kept thinking about coming back. After all, I wanted Emma to speak fluent Chinese. Sincere, whether I planned to return or not, I never intended to get involved between you and Victoria again." I asked, "Then why did you get involved?" He said, "Because Sophie called me." I asked, "So what did Victoria mean? What did she mean by saying she wouldn't have been with me if it weren't for you?" Ethan put down his chopsticks and said seriously, "I once said something to Victoria. I said, a high-class lady like her should be with a young master like you." I asked incredulously, "When did you say that?" He said, 4 years after I left the country. Around that time, Victoria accepted my confession, so that was it." I couldn't help but sigh. The sigh came out hoarse, filled with awkwardness and desolation. I stood up abruptly but suddenly felt dizzy. The next moment, a pair of delicate hands steadied me. It was Sophie. She supported me as we walked forward. She said, "Sincere, I'm sorry." I stopped but didn't turn around. I said quietly, "It has nothing to do with you." I drove my mustard yellow Cullinan aimlessly. After passing the same convenience store for the 3rd time, a voice came from the back seat. Sophie couldn't help saying, "You're lost." I was completely caught off guard, having forgotten there was still someone in the car. I said, "Sorry, where would you like to go?" She said, "I thought you were going to take me home." I nodded and said, "Okay, I'll take you home."